And this topic should be a video in and of itself because it permeates every way in which we interpret the Bible. In the modern West, we are obsessed with literalism. And for some reason, when we read the Bible, we lose all sense of context and nuance. We can't see symbolism, and instead we become extremely literal-minded. There's this really great quote from comedic actor John Cleese that says, the literal-minded don't understand irony. So that means if you take them seriously, you get rid of a lot of comedy because the literal-minded don't understand metaphor, irony, or comic exaggeration. And he goes on to say, the literal-minded people can only have one interpretation of what is being said. And we see this same problem in Western Christianity. I'm sure we've all heard the phrase, you have to take the Bible as literally as possible. But this is just terrible advice. You should take the Bible as seriously as possible, which means you take it literally when it's literal, symbolically when it's symbolic, and poetically when it's poetic. And symbolism is like paint, adding color and depth to the canvas of reality. The literal event, such as the fall of a kingdom, serves as the canvas, providing the foundation on which the symbolic imagery is layered to create a more powerful message. For example, it's raining cats and dogs is symbolic language. It's not literally raining cats and dogs. This is just symbolic language meant to dramatically paint a picture that we're getting a heavy dose of rain. We could just as easily say it's going to rain heavily tonight, but we love to use symbolic language. It's a very human thing to do. It's how we communicate. And interpreting Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 as referring to Satan is just an example of forcing literal interpretation onto symbolic language. And just think of the book Animal Farm, where the farm itself represents the nation state, while the animals symbolize different social classes and political figures. Orwell's use of exaggerated hyperbolic traits, such as Napoleon's ruthless cunning or Boxer's blind loyalty, heightens the story's impact, making the corruption of power and the betrayal of ideals much more striking. And this is all that's happening in the prophetic books like Isaiah and Ezekiel. These texts use vivid poetic imagery to describe the downfall of earthly kings, but later Christian tradition inserted Satan into them, mistaking allegory for literal. And this disrupts the natural symbolic meaning of the passages and overlooks the literary style in which they were written. And these passages are part of a broader series of prophecies against kings and kingdoms, yet it's only these two passages in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 that we have interpreted to be about Satan. And these passages use highly symbolic language to prophesy the judgment and destruction of these kings and their kingdoms. For example, in Isaiah 14, immediately after the verses we read that we generally attribute to Satan, we read about a judgment pronounced on Assyria. The prophecy then warns Philistia not to rejoice over Assyria's fall because a greater judgment is coming. And we read, "Rejoice not, O Philistia, all of you, that the rod that has struck you is broken, for from the serpent's root will come forth an adder, and its fruit will be a flying, fiery serpent." So why don't we attribute this passage to Satan as well? The land of the Philistines didn't literally see a flying, fiery serpent bring destruction, did they? Of course not. This is just symbolic language speaking of destruction that is coming their way. And there's no need to force a deeper meaning onto these passages. Just let the symbolism do its job in painting a vivid metaphorical picture. And the same applies to the passage about the king of Babylon. There is no need to impose a literal interpretation onto symbolic language. So the judgment that is pronounced on the king of Babylon here in Isaiah 14 is just a prophetic declaration of his downfall using vivid symbolism, nothing more. The text itself does not suggest a dual meaning here in these passages to refer to Satan, nor is there a connection made anywhere else in the Bible. That idea is extra-biblical, not originating from Scripture, but from tradition. And similar to what we found in Isaiah, in Ezekiel 25 through 32, we see another string of prophecies that are said against kings and their kingdoms. And as we've already read in Ezekiel 28, we see a prophecy against the king of Tyre. But because of a misunderstanding of its symbolic language, we have attributed this passage to Satan. But in Ezekiel 29, we read similar symbolic language in a prophecy against the Pharaoh of Egypt. "Behold, I am against you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great dragon that lies in the midst of his streams, that says, 'My Nile is my own. I made it for myself. I will put hooks in your jaws and make the fish of your streams stick to your scales. And I will draw you up out of the midst of your streams, with all the fish of your streams that stick to your scales. And I will cast you out into the wilderness, you and all the fish of your streams. You shall fall on the open field, and not be brought together or gathered. To the beasts of the earth and the birds of the heavens I give you as food. And this is just more symbolic language like we read in Ezekiel 28. So why don't we attribute this passage to Satan as well? Do we literally believe that the Pharaoh of Egypt was a great dragon that God was going to hook by the jaws and cast him into the wilderness so his carcass could be devoured by other animals? Of course not. We know this is symbolic language. We recognize that. So why, when we read Ezekiel 28, do we shift from symbolic to literal language? Because what you find when you read Old Testament passages, specifically the prophetic books, is this very vivid symbolic language that is pronouncing some form of a judgment on a nation or a king. Nowhere in the texts of Isaiah or Ezekiel is there any indication that the figure being addressed is anyone other than the kings they are being addressed to. And to read anything further into these passages is allowing tradition to lead us rather than scripture. The reality is the Bible offers no direct information about the origin of Satan.